So the Oklahoma City Thunder didn't make any significant trades at the NBA trade deadline. I was really curious to see if they would. On the one hand, they have the second best record in the league already. So obviously they don't need to make any moves to be legitimate contenders to win the NBA championship this year. On the other hand, there is literally no organization in basketball, arguably, other than the Thunder, that have as many resources with which to make a big trade. It seems like the OKC Thunder have just been stockpiling, an enormous amount of draft picks, and even though they're already one of the very best teams in the league, they have a jam-packed roster full of great young players that they have control over for years into the future. They have as many future draft picks as any team in the league. They have a lot of flexibility with their cap, their roster financial situation, so they can move pieces around to fit in another big piece if they wanted to. So it seemed like the writing was on the wall for OKC to maybe make a big splash. They're obviously competing for a championship this year. They're going to be neck and neck with teams like the Grizzlies and the Rockets in the Western Conference, the Cavaliers and the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. Some of those teams made some moves. The Cavs picking up DeAndre Hunter, which I think was a phenomenal move for them. If you're OKC and you're one of the favorites to win the championship this year, why not make a move to increase your odds, make it even more likely you're going to win? Now is the time. Well, of course, that raises the question, just because you have an abundance of assets with which to make a trade doesn't necessarily mean you have anything that you need to trade for. Which I think was really interesting looking at OKC's roster, seeing areas of improvement. I mean, I heard theories that they might try to trade for a guy like Cam Johnson of the Nets. They could have kicked the tires on Brandon Ingram, who ended up going to the Raptors. I think clearly if you look at OKC and what they could hypothetically need, it would be just one more good scoring option. They haven't been an elite scoring team this year. They've been the best defensive team in the NBA, and a really good scoring team, but it wouldn't hurt to add one more talented scorer, guy who can really generate his own offense. OKC, they got a lot of guys who can hit shots and finish, but as far as guys that can really generate their own offense, it's a pretty top-heavy roster. You have Shea, that's the best scorer in the league, so they're carried by Shea right now. J-Dub is another big-time scorer. They got some other guys who can score here and there, like Aaron Wiggins, Cason Wallace, Lou Dort, but they don't really have another guy that can necessarily get it going if, let's say, Shea is double-teamed or he's having an off night or something like that, which can be really important in the playoffs. Then, of course, you insert Chet Holmgren. So Chet Holmgren, I think, is the biggest variable on this team, and he's coming back tonight versus the Raptors off of an injury. So I think first and foremost, OKC not making a trade to get another scorer is just a huge vote of confidence in Chet Holmgren's offensive abilities and his ability to play the four alongside Isaiah Hartenstein. Because I think clearly OKC is going to go double big for the most part. I mean, they can mix and match depending on what team they're playing. Maybe go with a smaller ball lineup. But Isaiah Hartenstein is one of the most underrated players in the league. He's one of the best players on their team. So he's going to get a ton of minutes. He's not coming off the bench. He's going to be at the 5, which means that Holmgren's going to have to play at the 4. And the Thunder basically just really think that's going to work out, and I happen to think it will more or less as well. I mean, I think Holmgren certainly can play the 4, and I think that they're going to have a great team either way. Whether or not they'd be better in some matchups with, let's say, a guy like a Cam Johnson, or they could have traded for DeAndre Hunter instead of the Cavaliers. more of a conventional 4 in today's NBA, and going with a smaller ball lineup. Whether that would be good in some matchups, or just having a really, another really good wing scorer coming off the bench remains to be seen. But that's where I think a guy like Aaron Wiggins sort of comes in. I mean, I also think the Thunder not making any more trades is a huge vote of confidence in their bench, and a lot of the great young players they have. I've been saying this for a while now. When people talk about OKC's young core, they always talk about, Shea, J-Dub, Holmgren, obviously. Shea's actually, now he's one of the oldest players on the team, but J-Dub, Chet are still very young. They're just probably going to get better and better as the years go on. A guy like Casey Wallace, another high first-round draft pick with a lot of potential that's going to get better. People forget that their whole roster, essentially, is comprised of really young guys with legitimate upside. Like, someone like a Lou Dort is one of the vets of the team. People probably think he's a lot older than he is. I believe he's only 24 or 25 years old, which a lot of NBA players don't hit their prime until their late 20s. And we've seen him play better and better in recent years and display some more nuances to his game, put the ball on the floor a little bit, shoot more mid-range jumpers. Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, obviously Casey Wallace, like I mentioned. These guys are all under the age of 25. They all have the potential to get better, even better than they already are. Just like we expect Holmgren and J-Dub to get significantly better. And Shea has gone significantly better from ages 24 to 26, 27. And that's one of the reasons why the Thunder signed guys like Wiggins and Isaiah Joe to big extensions in the offseason. I mean, they got good deals on those guys. They're not paying them a ton of money, but they're paying them significant money. And players like that probably would have been one of the biggest pieces that had to move if the Thunder were going to try to make a big splash and bring in one more, bigger, more established name, like a Brandon Ingram or a Zach LaVine or a Jimmy Butler or something like that. A guy like Aaron Wiggins or Isaiah Joe or Casey Wallace probably would have been at the top of the card of names that had to get traded in that type of a deal, along with a bunch of first-round draft picks, obviously. And I could be wrong, but I don't think Sam Presti wants to move a lot of those guys. Obviously their teammates probably don't either, and, their fan base loves the fact that they are a really young, tight-knit, homegrown team. But I also think, if you just look at the way those guys are playing, like Aaron Wiggins had huge breakout game recently, scored 41 points and got 17 rebounds. And he's been playing really well ever since then. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the league, frankly, and he hasn't even gotten that much playing time in his career. So the more and more a guy like that plays, he can just get better and better. A guy like Casey Wallace is already a borderline elite defensive player, and is only 21 years old and is a great shooter, can put the ball on the floor, has hops. Like, he's got a high ceiling too. Isaiah Joe's been one of the best shooters in the league in January. He's one of the best shooters in the league in general. He's a guy who's been essentially, a lot of these guys have just pigeonholed themselves as 3-and-D guys to fit into the OKC system. But as they learn to be more aggressive offensively, put the ball on the floor more often, shoot off the dribble, like, these are all guys that I think could not just be great bench players or role players, but could be really great overall NBA players. And I think that's another big reason why Sam Presti didn't feel the need to try to add another big piece. Let's say the OKC traded for a guy like Cam Johnson. Who's to say Cam Johnson is really any better than Aaron Wiggins? He's averaging more points per game this year. He's older, more experienced, a little more consistent. But when Aaron Wiggins is at his best, He's been shooting the ball just as good from three the last couple of years. He's a great athlete. He's always been a fantastic defender. And so I think that one of the biggest reasons why OKC didn't make any big splashes this trade deadline, they haven't made as many big free agent signings in the offseason as they could have, is that they just really like a lot of the good young players they have in-house, not just, the stars that everybody talks about, but a lot of the under-talked about guys too. I think that they think have high ceilings. And maybe some of the draft assets that they would have had to give up, like their first-round draft pick last year, Nikola Topic, who has missed this whole year due to injury, kind of like Chet missed his whole first year due to injury, but coming out of the draft, people viewed him as a real high-risk, high-reward, high-upside type of guy. We know OKC doesn't draft anybody unless they think they have a world of potential, so maybe that's a guy that they don't necessarily want to part ways with, or at least not part ways with for cheap. Ousmane Dieng is another guy that has long been considered to have really high talent, really high upside. He's really young, just needs to get more playing time to blossom. I respect it, and I think OKC can absolutely still win a title this year with the pieces they have. I don't think they needed to make any upgrades. I think that Holmgren is going to fit in well enough at the four. Whether or not he stays healthy, I think, is a huge question mark, and they're also really betting on him to stay healthy. But I also think that this situation OKC has, it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with it moving forward into future seasons, because they also just signed Alex Caruso to a big extension, which I thought was a really interesting deal, because obviously OKC loves Alex Caruso. That's why they asked for him back in the Josh Giddey trade. That's why I forget if they drafted him or he was in their G League for a while, but he's one of the very best defensive players in the league. I mean, that's a role player that almost any team would like to have somewhere on their roster, at least for specific situations. But, I mean, you look at their whole roster right now, their starting five is going to be their starting five of next year, probably, unless it really doesn't work out in the playoffs for some reason. But you got Shea, you got Dort, you got J-Dub, Holmgren, Hartenstein. Those guys probably aren't going anywhere. Coming off the bench, Cason Wallace, Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Alex Caruso, now all under contract for years into the future. And like I mentioned, their first-round draft pick from last year, Topic, is hopefully going to be healthy. And they might have 3 first-round draft picks this year coming in on top of everybody I just named, not to mention guys like Jay Will and Kenrich Williams and Ousmane Dieng and AJ Mitchell, who are all good young players under contract. They could move some of those guys, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see whether or not OKC at some point tries to leverage this abundance of really good, above average young players for, say, one more superstar type of player that they think can take them to an even another level. And maybe a reason why they didn't make a big move this trade deadline is because they just didn't view any of the pieces moving as worthy of that, or maybe just not a good fit. Like you look at Brandon Ingram, Zach LaVine, some of the bigger names that moved. They're really great players, obviously. They're well above average player. De'Aaron Fox is another guy they theoretically could have traded for. But, one, they might not think those guys are either a good fit in a basketball sense on their team, or maybe in a personality sense. I mean, OKC and Sam Presti is definitely an organization that likes to, thoroughly vet players and have a systemic culture and, really make sure everyone is totally on the same page. But also maybe they just didn't think any of those guys were that significant of an upgrade over what they already have. But, maybe in the future, if the Bucks ever decide to move on from Giannis, or I know at some point they were tied to like Lauri Markkanen on the Jazz would be an interesting fit. Although now that they have double big, I'm not sure that would work out. I don't know. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head necessarily that OKC would want to move heaven and earth for. They could have tried to do it for Luka. Luka on OKC would have been absolutely terrifying. I think he would have been a very different fit than every other player they have on their roster, because OKC clearly values like defense and synchronicity, and Luka would have been a guy that I don't think they wanted to do a culture shock move like that, but they could have done it. I mean, like accommodating huge contracts is another big issue with NBA teams making trades. They can't just trade for the guys they want the most. They also have to be able to fit them financially on their roster. But that's where OKC has a ton of flexibility too. I mean, they have a lot of guys under contract that they can shed at any moment if they decide they want to. They can move on from a guy like Kenrich Williams, Aaron Wiggins, Alex Caruso. They're paying all these guys pretty good money. Even Lou Dort theoretically wouldn't be untouchable. I think the big question I have, if I could ask Sam Presti, or just what's going to be interesting to see with them moving forward, is do they not want to make any big external addition to their roster because they legitimately don't think it's going to help their chance to win necessarily? Or is it because they just, from a narrative perspective, they just love the fact that they're doing it from within, that it's all a young core, and they just want to ride or die with this group, and they don't want to shake anything up too much because why jinx a good thing, you know? But those will be the interesting questions to see moving forward for their organization. Obviously, too many good options is a good problem to have, and OKC is going to be one of the best teams in the league for years to come. But so are the Rockets, and so are the Grizzlies, and so are the Cavs, and the Spurs are coming, and the Magic are coming. So whether or not, OKC stays in this rarefied air of having the best young core in all of basketball and the most young assets in all of basketball, I think is a big question mark. It should be asked whether maybe they should go all in just right now while they're already a first place team. And maybe they should have tried to get, a bigger piece and shuffle some pieces around to make it fit. Or maybe Chet Holmgren's going to come back and he's going to be one of the best players in the league, and OKC is going to win a title this year. I mean, if I had to bet on one team to win a title this year, people might think I'm kind of crazy, but I'm picking OKC. I really am. I think the Cavs have a great shot. I think DeAndre Hunter was the perfect piece that they needed. The Rockets and the Grizzlies, I think, are real dark horse threats because they have almost just as much talent as OKC, and they're just as young, and I don't think they have as great of team chemistry, or they don't have it figured out as much as OKC does yet, but they have half a season yet left to figure it out, and they could be a matchup check to OKC. They're both teams that are really strong on the boards. So the Rockets, the Grizzlies, the Cavs, of course the Celtics, these are all teams that could knock OKC out of the playoffs this year. But if I had to pick one team to win this year, even without moves, if Holmgren stays healthy, I think OKC can get the job done this year. Or if not, I don't think there's any team that is in any better shape, at least, to win in the years moving forward. But if there's one thing we know about today's NBA, it is super topsy-turvy, and one team can look like they're going to hold, the proverbial winning football for the foreseeable future. Like, it looked like the Nuggets might rattle off multiple championships. It looked like the Celtics last year had one of the greatest teams of all time, and it looked like they might rattle off multiple championships. And now, all of a sudden, this year, they don't even have the best record in the league, So 1 minute, it can look like the Thunder can do no wrong and a championship is all but guaranteed. And the next minute, maybe Victor Wembanyama becomes the best player in the league, and with De'Aaron Fox and, Stephen Castle takes that next step, and next thing you know, the Spurs are the best team in the Western Conference. So I think OKC has to be careful to, at the same time, not jeopardize what's going on in terms of their youth movement and the future, but also, like, you got to get a chip. If you're Sam Presti, you have to win a title. You didn't win a title with James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Russell Westbrook. You absolutely have to win a title with the core you have right now. There's just no excuse, and this year is as good of a year as any. And, maybe they should have tried to trade for Zach LaVine or De'Aaron Fox or one more superstar player to try to increase their odds of doing that, or maybe they're going to win a title this year anyways. It'll be interesting to see.